Welcome to Day 5, Module 5 of how to buy your first rental property in Cleveland, Ohio in the years 2026 or 2027. So we're talking about lenders today. So lenders, really important that you get this right. Now, again, we've talked about different ways of doing the money, but there's a huge benefit in using a lender, especially in 2026, 2027. So I've already mentioned DSCR lenders and hard money. And I would say we're going to go over those two in a little bit more detail, as well as talk about some like in-between options like local portfolio lenders / local banks that might be an option here. And before I go into detail on those three, let me just say that if you just text back or email back with one word in the link, the email that you got in this, the link lenders, just put that one word and start with that one word and put only that word in a reply. We'll get you back a quick little message or PDF with a list of these lenders that are actual local with specific contacts that would be usable for you to immediately start doing that research. So I'm glad to help on that and share our resources with you in addition to the knowledge. So first of all, let's start with the local portfolio banks because that's something we haven't mentioned so far. And then we'll go into a little bit more detail on the other two. So when it comes to actually financing, so like on a BRRRR or when you're refinancing or on a turnkey property when you're just getting that straight up financing, sometimes it makes sense to go with like a local or what I call a portfolio lender. And this is one of these things. I remember first getting into this when I was 19 and hearing people talk about it was very confusing how lending worked and the secondary markets and this is and that's and talked about Fannie and Freddie and I don't know if you, okay, never mind. So anyways, used to be that pretty much all corporate loans, like 95%, both in owner-occupied properties and single families up to like 4-family units. 95, 98% of them, something like that, they would be originated by a bank, a broker, or a lender of some type. By originated, they were given to you or underwritten, or you'd work with the guy that would collect all your paperwork and then you would get a mortgage and it would close. Well, anyways, that like 95% of those were sold after being originated to a third party that would buy these in big groups and big packages. And those mortgages were then, it was like a huge lender that people could invest stock in that lender. And they were partially supported and also regulated by the federal government and Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. And so those lenders, those two lenders really were responsible for how loans were done. So they had regulations. And one of the big regulations was you couldn't get more than 10 loans. If you had more than 10 open, you had a hard limit. So you could never buy more than that. And so at the time, they had all sorts of ways of getting past that. But at this point in time, that's mostly gone away. And most loans now that are done are what's called DSCR, okay? Now, there is a segment, sometimes they're still considered DSCR. There is a segment of banks that are known for not reselling to any other market, not Fannie or any, okay? And they would be called a portfolio lender. In other words, they have a group of loans that they keep in-house. They're portfolioed. So there's some local credit unions that do this. And one of them that I've used is Eaton Family Credit Union out of Euclid, bordering Cleveland here. And then similarly, there's several banks as well that portfolio. And so one of those is First Federal Lakewood. I believe they keep most or all of their loans in-house. They don't resell them. First Federal Lorraine also does so. Now, these portfolio lenders, a lot of times they want a full document loan program, but oftentimes their interest rates are going to be lower. So what a full document is, they're going to look at all your assets. They want to see a complete final. You have to spend all this time tracing down things if you have a significant number of assets. They're going to ask for more, but what you get in return is a relationship, oftentimes with an actual rep that you'll be talking with. You'll be seeing common sense underwriting. In other words, it's not just purely based on rules, but because you have a relationship with the rep, that rep knows the underwriter. Literally, they can walk to the next office and say hi. It's not an underwriter in a building with a big company in a big building in Washington, D.C., right? And so it's not just pure rule-based, but it's using a little more common sense terms. And then the relationship longer term usually ends up being a lot less likely to become predatory. And that's a big deal. When you've seen as much go down, you think just accept whatever the loan is and it may be worth it for some of you to seek that. And then there's also certain instances. So for instance, I had a mixed use building that included Airbnb units and an office. And there's really no lender that would do it except for a local bank that portfolioed themselves. I checked with brokers, checked all over. And for whatever reason, it was just an odd set of characteristics. They'd lend to all Airbnb building, they'd lend to all office building. They didn't want to do both, right? So it was a unique deal that I had. And I recognize that's a little bit out of what I'm saying when it says buy your first property. But hey, what? I'm just saying, we'll give you a list of them if you request. And depending on what you're doing, look into it. I would, okay? There's some real benefits to it. They're not going to be quick, okay? Usually. Some of them can be quick. I've seen them do in 2 weeks, but if they're really doing a full documentation, normally it's a little slower, okay? Just, it might be slow on your side to get everything they want, right? So like I said, I would check into it because they will give you a much better rate than almost anywhere most of the time. And oftentimes their cost to originate are lower as well, okay? Which adds up. So when you're talking about money, a little bit adds up to a lot over time. So the next is these DSCR loans. So DSCR loans are based on income, like we talked about. And there are many, like I remember being surprised the first time I did a DSCR loan. They asked for like 1 page to be filled out, real basic, and they wanted to see my bank statement. And they ran my credit report, and they had me approved that same day. And it was a very smooth closing. Right. And what totally blew me away is they use a slightly different system for determining your rate. Most of them do offer 30-year fixed. Usually they also offer options with a slightly lower rate for a 5-year fix, and then it varies based on whatever rate that they're syncing with underlying. But what I found was that I got lucky this one time where I had a portfolio lender that offered one rate. They were actually half a point at that point in time. It was just an anomaly, right? Most of the time they're about a half a point above, like a bank loan that you would get for a house you're going to live in, maybe 3/4 of a point above. Okay. In this case, they were half a point below. And this was back a year or two ago when the rates were like at a high for our time. It was like a year and a half ago. And the rates were really about as high as they'd been for many years. So what I'm just saying is it's worth the check around, but a DSCR lender that specializes in investment properties can save you a lot of time, and the right one can be a huge partner in creating a real estate portfolio that creates a lot of wealth for you. Now, hard money loans. Let's talk about hard money. So hard money loans vary a lot, but in reality, you're normally, when you say hard money, talking about a renovation loan. It's a short-term loan just designed for financing renovation, and then the intention of it being paid off in a short period of time. What I would say is you're going to have a variety of different kinds of hard money. I have paid as much as 5 points to originate a hard money, and most private lenders that do hard money, like there might be like a guy that has a few rich people he knows that lends out his friend's money, or maybe he had sold a business or has a retirement fund and he's his own retirement money, and he's funding people's deals short term. Most of those guys, if you don't go direct, like you don't have your own rich person to fund you, your dad or brother that's a doctor, your rich aunt, most of them are going to have some points up front. 3 to 5 is pretty common. In the old days, I mentioned it was up to as high as 10 right off the top. So if you borrowed $50,000 plus another $30,000 renovation, they're going to charge points on all of that, even though they might not have given you that $30,000 renovation yet. So you'll pay all that. Normally it's interest on all of it, even though you haven't been given the rest yet. So that's on the small end, right? That being said, those private ones, sometimes they'll close in a day. Now the corporate ones usually say they'll close in a week or something like that, but usually it's like 2 weeks or more. Even when they say they can, it's just, I don't know why they say they can to get you in, and then they don't close quite as fast as they said. They typically have more regulations. So the nice thing of working with a private lender, there are almost no rules other than the ones they give you, right? There's nothing like over top saying that has to be done a certain way. By the way, most of these lenders do require that you borrow the money in a corporate entity to avoid usury law that comes with consumer lending, right? So even the lower interest ones still require you to borrow within an LLC. But again, if you're borrowing from your aunt, a family member, a friend, somebody through church, oftentimes they don't care. And if it's not their main business, many of them don't care about points. So you can get, and there's courses out there, you can get how to get private money for real estate transactions. And that's like a whole business of itself and a whole set of marketing, so you got to question, is it really worth it? It's nice to be able to just call someone up and say, hey, I got this deal. And if it makes sense to them, they'll fund it. One of the nice things about the local private money lenders is they'll actually do some deal analysis for you because they don't want to get involved in a deal. It doesn't make sense. So sometimes you'll get a pretty smart real estate guy that's seen it all and is pretty savvy, and they'll walk through their property and say, nah, not doing it. Or they'll ask you the numbers, and in 30 seconds, they'll say, I'll do it, or no, I won't, right? Or a little of both, somewhere between that. Now, on the corporate side, private money, of hard money, there are a lot more regulations. The interest rate is shorter, but just remember, if you can get this renovated quickly, interest rate doesn't make such a difference. Also, what I will say is corporate draws can be quite an issue. And they can be really, any private money can be really difficult if your renovation takes a lot longer. So like I had a very complicated renovation. I had a corporate lender and I ended up having to finance. This is a big deal, big project. I ended up I had factored in like $80,000 of draws, which they gave me 10,000, and they were so difficult on giving draws. And then the project went so over budget that I ended up having to put closer to 200,000. Again, this is me explaining that I'm not the hero. Like I messed up pretty bad, but I think the cost of this project ended up being closer to $200,000 in renovation fees. Okay. And I was fortunate enough that I had those resources personally to do it. Not only that, it came to about a year, and that was their hard stop. And I had never in my life, like I was not done by any means. And it was not easy to get another loan. There's going to be more costs. And they forced me to refinance or pay off the loan a year in. And I was still dropping tons of money into this project, all this cash. And all I can say is, if you're using any third-party lender, really make sure that the project fits how they'll work with you. Like if it could be big and undefined, probably better not to do it in general for your first project. But just understand you probably may need a backup if things were to go different than you planned, right? And they sometimes do. So really, I ended up having to get another hard money lender to do it. And I already had, at that point in time, a whole lot of cash that I had put into it. And then it ended up being a lot longer. Thankfully, the new hard money lender worked with me a lot better. Got it all done. Ended up being a really good deal for me. Ended up having 50% equity after I was done with this large project. But at the end of the day, that is the point, is that if you have the cash ready, you'll be able to go through the difficult times or the unexpected things and still make a lot of money. Right? So that's the lesson. Hard money, love it or hate it, can be really useful. If you can do without it, the more control you have, the better. And the less control you have on contracting, the more you need a hard money lender that's going to work with you if you need one, right? So anyways, that's a little bit more on the lenders that are available. And like I said, I'd be glad to send you more actual contacts that will help you with our thoughts on those. Thanks for listening to day 5 on lenders and talking to lenders before you do the deal. As you can see, there's a lot to the whole lender equation. You really don't want to get into a deal without knowing this information. So look forward to seeing you tomorrow, hopefully, for module 6, day 6, in terms of actually choosing the area. Now that you got the money and you got the right thought processes and you're thinking better about how to choose the right deal, let's look at the actual area specifically. In the Cleveland, Ohio market, you should be investing 2026, 2027. Look forward to see you tomorrow. As always, ask any questions you want, and feel free to click the link to schedule with a property management company with our property management reps if you're thinking that maybe property management makes sense for you.